Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. I'm here in the studio with Libby Herland, Refuge Manager, and Kate Iaquinto, a wildlife biologist, both with the Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge. Thank you both for being here with me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start by explaining what the Monomoy Refuge is and where it is, because some of our listeners really might not be familiar with it.
Okay. Well, Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge, it's located in Chatham, and it's if you look at a map of Cape Cod, you see this little appendage hanging off of the elbow of Cape Cod. That's the Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge. It's about 8,000 acres of land and water, and we manage it for migratory birds, particularly shorebirds, seabirds, and federally listed endangered species.
And what's the history of the area?
Well, the refuge was established in 1944. It is part of that we're part of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and so the refuge is part of the National Wildlife Refuge System, which to just put it into context, Monomoy Refuge is one of 11 national wildlife refuges located in Massachusetts and one of 562 national wildlife refuges that are found across the country. Every state has a national wildlife refuge, at least one, and as I said, Massachusetts has 11. And the purpose of the refuge system is to administer a national network of lands and waters for the conservation, management, and, where appropriate, the restoration of fish, wildlife, and plant resources and their habitats within the United States for the benefit of present and future generations of Americans. That's our mission statement, and I just wanted to start with that to help people get a context for what the Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge is and why it's here. It was established particularly to protect migratory waterfowl, wintering waterfowl, but at the time it was established, it was known that it was also going to have value for shorebirds, and it has a tremendous amount of value for shorebirds.
And with one purpose being to protect birds and wildlife, Kate, what types of birds and wildlife does one find out there?
So it depends on the time of year. This time of year, we have large rafts of sea ducks that are still in the area that were here for the winter. But come spring, we'll start seeing our shorebird species and some nesting species. The species that primarily nest on the refuge are common and roseate terns, piping plovers, American oyster catchers. We have 3 species of gulls. We have black-crowned night herons, snowy egrets, and great egrets. So it's quite a diverse area for nesting. And then in the fall, we're extremely important for southern migrating shorebirds that are coming through from their breeding areas going to their wintering areas. And then in the winter, the ducks come back. So we do have some waterfowl nesting that happens in the summer as well. It's pretty diverse as far as bird species on the refuge go.
And don't you have some endangered species there?
Yeah, we do. So piping plovers are federally threatened species. Roseate terns are federally endangered, and those are 2 species that we work really closely with. We also have least terns, which are state-listed species, and common terns, and I believe American oyster catchers are both special concern species in the state of Massachusetts. So all of those species are ones that we monitor very closely. We track their nesting progress from when they arrive on the island till when they've hatched chicks, and those chicks can fly and then they leave. So we have been studying most of those species on the island since the mid-90s.
Let's talk a little bit about where Monomoy is and how that's changed over the years.
Sure. In recent years, there's been a lot of changes. It's been pretty dramatic. I began working at the refuge in 2007, and that was shortly after a beach known as South Beach or Lighthouse Beach actually migrated south several miles from the mainland where the Chatham Light is and attached to South Monomoy Island. So that happened in 2006, and there was a period of years where we were attached to the mainland. And then in 2013, in February, during a winter storm, South Beach broke. And it broke again last winter, but we sort of consider it one main break. Because of the exchange of water from the east and west side of South Beach being uneven, mostly what is happening is the sand has been blown into the Southway from east to west towards the refuge from South Beach. So now in the middle of what is known as the Chatham Southway is sort of a giant series of sandbars. A lot of shoaling has occurred, and it's blocked the boat access to the Southway for a large part of the tide cycle. It's always changing. We don't have boats in the water right now, but we will soon, so we'll be getting out there and figuring out what the windows are for actually passing through that area. So it's not as open of an inlet as some of the other outer beach inlets where they're now using them to access the ocean. You can certainly get through at high tide, but I don't know how quickly that will change. And it is always changing. For the last couple of years, it's been changing on almost a daily basis, really, like a monthly basis.
Yeah, and we know this is actually part of a cycle. And there's about 100 to 150-year cycle of attachment, detachment, breaking, reforming, and again, it's the tidal flats and the shoals. When the refuge was established in 1944, you could actually drive your car on what is now the wilderness area of Monomoy. You could never drive a car. You couldn't get a car there now. So it's very interesting to see the whole history of breaks and the way things form, but it's trying to come back. Now this area, South Beach, is starting to roll over to the west onto South Monomoy Island.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. I'm talking about the Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge with Libby Herland, Refuge Manager, and Kate Iaquinto, a wildlife biologist with Monomoy. Now let's get right into the refuge's new conservation plan.
Well, every National Wildlife Refuge is required to have what's called a comprehensive conservation plan. And this is required as part of our organic legislation for the whole National Wildlife Refuge system that I mentioned before. There are criteria for what should be included in the plan, but basically it's a look at the next 15 years or so of refuge management. We develop these plans with input from stakeholders and the public, and there is a public review process. We either write an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement, depending on the nature of the plan. And for the case of Monomoy, we wrote an environmental impact statement because we knew that there were a lot of issues potentially that would be affecting folks, and we thought it would be more appropriate to write a more in-depth analysis to conduct a more in-depth analysis of our proposed actions. So a draft comprehensive conservation plan looks at everything that we would like to do in a 15-year period, primarily focusing a lot, of course, on our biological program, because that is the heart of the refuge, is what we're going to do for wildlife and for the habitat. We call it population monitoring. It's population monitoring, wildlife habitat management, and that's where some of the predator management comes into that. And then visitors, people are really important to the refuge as well, so we have a whole section and goal on visitors, and we want people to come out and enjoy our refuges. We want them to understand, what we do for wildlife and why we do it, and help people connect to nature, which is, as you know, is a big issue right now. A lot of people are kind of disconnected from nature, so being able to go to a national wildlife refuge and observe wildlife, photograph it, hunt and fish, and are all part of what we do on a lot of national wildlife refuges. So in this case, we're looking at specifically at Monomoy and what it can provide for the public. And then we look at things like maintenance and staffing levels, partnerships, working with the community. So those are all the types of things that are in a comprehensive conservation plan, including the one for Monomoy.
Now, what's the status of the plan now? Is it still in the process of approval?
Right. We are still working on it. So the draft plan went out for public review and comment last April, and we had a really long comment period of 180 days, which is not typical, but there was a lot of interest in the plan, including from the town and many other stakeholders, and so they asked for more time to be able to review the plan. They're very concerned about how it might affect the residents and visitors to Chatham and to the Cape. So we granted that 6-month period. We received about 250 individual comments, and then we had a couple petitions for about another 2,000, maybe 2,600 signatures altogether. And many of the comments were very detailed. So we've spent the last 5 months pulling together the issues, summarizing the issues, and developing our response to those issues. That's where we are right now. We hope to have a final comprehensive plan and environmental impact statement out for public review and comment. Again, it's a 30-day comment period this time, and really basically it's looking at so people can see how we address the comments and the changes that we made as a result of those comments. So that's what this next round of public review and comment is. And we hope to have that plan out by July, if not earlier. We're actually striving for earlier, but it takes a while. And then after we get whatever comments we might get, we will go in and finalize the plan, and then it goes to our regional director for signature.
And does that complete the process, that signature?
That signature will complete the process, and then we will begin implementation.
And you say you're working on the response to the comments.
Right. I do anticipate some changes. I can't tell you what those are right now. We are responding to them. We're still gathering a little information. I did meet on Friday with the town of Chatham and with our regional chief. And we are going to be getting a little bit more information from the town, get some clarification on some of their comments, and also just have them provide us with a little information, things that we don't really fully understand, some aspects of fishing, for example, and techniques and gear. So we're still working on it, but we're actually making really good progress.
Now, what are some of the changes in the plan to what's being done now?
Well, I think the thing that is probably got the most attention is that we clarified our boundary of the refuge. And we pretty much have just been managing the uplands and the tidal flats. And when we manage the tidal flats, it's basically just looking at the uses that are occurring on the tidal flats. So we looked at our boundaries, and we determined that, in fact, our boundary goes out to it gets a little complicated, but we're trying to keep it simple. But when the refuge was established, there was a line that was called the Declaration of Taking. And it includes some open water areas. So we looked at all the fisheries that are occurring within that area, and we determined that quite a few of them we don't feel need to be regulated by us at this time because they're regulated by the state and or the town. But we did recommend that, for example, that there be no mussel harvest because mussels are an important food source for several refuge species, both in the winter and in the summer. So a few changes in some of the fisheries that could occur, and that was fairly controversial. We also recommended that kiteboarding not be allowed. We have never officially opened. And any refuge in the country has to be open for a use before it is technically allowed. You have to open the refuge because they're closed to the public until they're open, and you go through this whole planning process and you identify how things are going to be conducted and managed and monitored. So kiteboarding is a use that we have some concerns about the impact of the inadvertent impact. It's not intentional, but there is, we believe, an impact to wildlife as a result of that use. So we looked at that. And we also proposed things from a visitor services point of having a concessionaire to help us deliver more effective programs and access to the public for wildlife-related activities on the refuge.
Now, that annexing of the land seems to be one of the bigger issues from the town of Chatham, and I think it's 717 acres, and I don't know if that is that part of what you're still working on?
Right. So we're still looking at the South Beach annex. Well, we don't call it an annexation. But the plan looks at our management alternatives, and the boundary is not a policy decision. The boundary is actually more of a realty. I can't think of the word, but it's not an option for us. We either own it or we don't. And so, but that did generate also a lot of comments from the public because with the addition of South Beach to the refuge, it falls under our management versus town management. Things will be they're different. They're slightly different. And in some cases, they're substantially different.
I don't think they're that different.
Yeah. Well, certain times of year, they're not that different. And then it may be in the fall that there's a little bit more relaxation. I would say the town standards are a little bit more relaxed than ours. We don't allow dogs, for example, on the islands at all, ever.
But they're not allowed on South Beach during the... Yeah, so I think during the nesting season, most of the regulations will be the same as the town regulations because there are very strict regulations for beach use during the summer for piping plovers. In the off-season, it will be a little bit different.
Right.
Now, I guess what we've heard is that Chatham officials have said they believe their management of the resources have been sound over the decades, and so they wonder why the need to make these changes.
Right, and I do think that the town has been a very good steward of their lands and their fisheries. Our focus is slightly different. Our responsibility is migratory birds, so we come at everything from what is the impact of this particular use or this particular management action on wildlife and the wildlife species that we either have on the refuge or, maybe we don't have as much use of the refuge as we should, considering, say, the habitat that we have. And sometimes public uses, sometimes people, there isn't always a conflict, but there can be a conflict between what people are doing or where they're doing it or when they're doing it or how they're doing it and wildlife, just in general. So, we're looking at it from, our mission, our job is to conserve wildlife. And that is a different orientation from the town. We have worked with them in the past, and I know that we all want to try to continue to work together in the future to make Monomoy and the lands around Monomoy as beneficial as they can be for wildlife and still preserving a lot of options for the public to be able to use the area as well.
The restrictions on fishing, have you heard from people in the town of Chatham that will really have a big impact economically there?
That was part of their comments. They felt that there would be definitely some impact to them. So.
Does it sound like there's a chance to sort of negotiate a compromise on some of these issues?
Well, we don't negotiate with anybody. We listen, we gather information, and then we will make our final decisions based on the information that we have, the impact to wildlife. But we are getting additional information, which is helping us inform our decision. But it is our decision to make, and it's not a negotiation. But meeting with folks and talking to them is very valuable to us, and we really appreciate the input that we got from the public, from the state, Mass Wildlife, and the Division of Marine Fisheries, and also from the town officials and the other stakeholders, neighbors.
And unfortunately, we're out of time. We've been talking about Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge, and I've been talking to Libby Herland and Kate Iaquinto, both from Monomoy, about this refuge. Thank you both for being with me here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.